My name is Harper Lin, and at 38 years old, I've learned that the quietest success can echo the loudest, especially when no one sees it coming. I've spent the last decade in Austin, Texas, carving out a career in venture tech capital, steadily rising without the need for applause or spotlight. Results, I've always believed, should speak for themselves. My older sister, Camille, never quite shared that philosophy. At 41, Camille has made it an art form to turn every brunch, birthday, or baby shower into a stage. She's the kind of woman who updates her LinkedIn weekly and recites her job title like it's a mantra. Senior Marketing Strategist at Villanova Brands. Thank you very much. Camille's been the crown jewel of our family since we were kids. Honors student, homecoming queen, the daughter who got a full ride to Northwestern and still managed to humble brag about it 10 years later. What no one in my family knows, not Camille, not even my parents, is that just over a month ago, I finalized a deal that made me one of the top equity partners at Zirion Capital, a firm that quietly acquired majority shares in Villanova Brands. Yes, that Villanova. The same company where Camille struts around in stilettos, sipping oat milk lattes in boardrooms she doesn't know I now help control. The absurdity of it hits me as I pull into the parking lot of the Blue Juniper, the chic little cafe my family chose for Dad's 70th birthday brunch this morning. I've lost count of how many times Camille has tossed off comments about my niche career or modest apartment, only to redirect the spotlight with tales of campaigns, networking galas, or her latest designer handbag. I've nodded along, sipping coffee quietly, while she monologues about managing brand ambassadors and market shares, never guessing her younger sister was becoming one of the very people who approve her department's budget. My phone vibrates. Another email from Zirion's executive board. Subject line: immediate input needed on Q3 marketing restructuring. Camille's division. I inhale slowly, nerves tangled with something I can't quite name. Maybe pride, maybe anticipation. I never set out to overshadow Camille. I just wanted my work to matter, even if no one clapped for it. But today, as I walk toward our usual corner table, I can't help but wonder, when Camille glances at her next pay stub and sees my name on the approval line, will she finally look at me differently? Maybe now, the shadow will shift. This dynamic wasn't exactly anyone's fault. I truly believe our parents loved us both. But there was a clear difference in how they responded to us. Camille's such a natural leader, they'd beam, showcasing her colorful collages on the fridge. Meanwhile, my more technically detailed sketches, blueprints and cityscapes drawn with rulers and precision, would be briefly acknowledged with a smile before being tucked quietly into a drawer. Camille's so charismatic, just like her dad. Our aunts and uncles would gush during holidays. Me? I was the quiet one. Or worse, forgotten in introductions entirely. I think the moment it all crystallized for me was during the 6th grade science showcase at Barton Springs Elementary. I had spent weeks designing an experiment on solar conductivity using handmade panels, logging hours of data, and hand illustrating my graphs in a binder that became my pride and joy. Camille, then in 9th grade, glanced through my binder one night while I was sleeping. The next morning over pancakes, she casually dropped a few of my discoveries into conversation with our parents, claiming them as parts of her own science class discussions. When I spoke up, saying those were my findings for tomorrow's showcase, our mom laughed and said, "Oh, Harper, don't be dramatic. Camille's been studying renewable energy for her STEM elective for ages." Across the table, Camille gave me a smirk that only I could see. My cheeks burned. That moment didn't just sting, it taught me something. In our family, Camille's words carried weight. Mine were background noise. So, I stopped chasing the spotlight. Instead, I dug into the spaces she ignored. While Camille was busy in drama club and student council, mastering the same persuasion tactics she'd later bring into marketing, I was staying after school for robotics and reading financial blogs at 13. I even subscribed to Investors Daily with my allowance. Not because anyone told me to, but because Camille didn't care about any of it. And that made it mine. "Numbers are boring," she once said, catching me diagramming a startup's business model on a napkin. "You'll never get anywhere if you can't hold a conversation without turning beet red." Her laugh was sharp, but weirdly freeing. She thought data, strategy, and quiet diligence were beneath her. And that meant I had found the place where I could thrive without comparison. By the time Camille was winning speech competitions and school elections, I was building simulations in Java and pitching budget plans in AP Econ. At 16, when I said I wanted to study finance and systems engineering, Camille burst out laughing. You? Harper, you'd freeze up asking a waiter for extra ketchup. Our parents chuckled, not cruelly, but confidently, as if Camille's opinion was gospel. That night, lying in the dark of my Austin bedroom, I made a quiet vow. They didn't have to believe in me. I would believe in myself. And one day, they'd see. I had no idea back then that this quiet promise would end up shaping the next 15 years of my life, guiding me through choices that would eventually intersect with, and maybe even surpass, Camille's carefully polished path. The day our college acceptance letters arrived marked the first true fork in our journeys. Camille had already been at Sierra Ridge University in California for 2 years, a private liberal arts school known for its elite communications program and alumni connections. Her acceptance had triggered a catered dinner party, a new leather suitcase, and a round of celebratory phone calls to every relative from Houston to Hong Kong. When I received a full academic scholarship to Lone Star State University's Business Analytics program, my parents were pleased. But their reactions were subdued. "Solid choice," Dad said, with that same diplomatic tone people use when settling for the last slice of pie. "State has a respectable program." Camille, home for spring break, peeked at my scholarship packet over breakfast. "Well," she said, twice glancing at the tuition line, "at least you won't have student debt." Then came the kicker. "Though, you'll definitely miss out on the kind of connections real schools offer." And that one line set the tone for our college years. Camille's updates were always grand. Industry mixers in Napa, internships with boutique PR firms, alumni trips to Greece. Her stories were populated with executives' children, founders' nieces, and people who used summering as a verb. I, on the other hand, was clocking in 5 a.m. shifts at a campus cafe, taking statistics at 8, and spending evenings learning SQL and Python. I didn't have a sorority sister with a tech startup. I became the intern at a startup no one could pronounce. I built dashboards, pitched process automations, and earned a spot at the table through persistence, not pedigree. By junior year, I landed a part-time position as a financial analyst for that same startup. When I shared the news over Thanksgiving dinner, Camille barely looked up from spooning cranberry sauce. She had brought her new boyfriend, Daniel, a finance major from a family with their name on a business school building. "Daniel just accepted an offer at BCG," she said, beaming. "And I'm interviewing with Varelo Brands next week. They only consider top-tier candidates from name schools." Then she turned to me, that same empty smile. "Still at the coffee shop?" I explained my full-time offer at the startup and its growth in enterprise automation. Before I could finish, Camille cut in. "So, you'll be crunching numbers in a tiny cubicle forever? I guess that fits." Our parents chuckled softly, and for a second, doubt crept in. But deep down, I knew. What Camille called cubicle work was exactly where real influence begins. Starting from scratch, my modest post-grad salary was just enough for a shared duplex on the east side of Austin. While my peers splurged on downtown lofts and weekend trips to Cabo, I saved obsessively, tucking away nearly 40% of my income. In my downtime, I devoured books on investment strategy, signed up for every free financial workshop I could find, and began placing small, calculated investments in early-stage tech ventures. My first real breakthrough came 3 years after graduation, when a niche ed tech platform I'd backed was acquired by a larger firm. That single move tripled my initial investment. I didn't post about it. I didn't even tell my parents. I poured a glass of wine in my kitchen, stared at the confirmation email, and let a quiet wave of satisfaction wash over me. I had learned by then that my victories wouldn't be celebrated like Camille's, and that was okay. While she racked up title changes and new followers, I was building something quieter: independence, resilience, and a portfolio that would one day speak louder than any resume. To most of our family, though, I was still just Harper, the quiet one with the office job. At gatherings, Camille still stole the spotlight with stories about branding campaigns for celebrity skincare lines or influencer collaborations in Europe. No one asked about ROI margins or software integrations, so I kept those to myself. By the time we hit our 30s, our lives looked dramatically different, though not in the way people assumed. Camille seemed to have it all. A senior role at Varello Brands, a luxury high-rise condo in downtown Dallas, and a husband, Daniel, whose family practically owned half of Lakewood. Her Instagram was a steady stream of curated dinners, designer handbags, and rooftop selfies. But I started noticing something beneath the surface. Tension, perhaps even envy. It began at our cousin Emily's wedding 3 years ago. I just turned 30 and had been promoted to a strategic leadership role at a mid-sized fintech firm. My biggest leap yet. As I was about to answer a question from our aunt about work, Camille stepped in. "Harper's still figuring things out," she said sweetly, patting my arm. "Not everyone takes off early, right?" Her laugh was airy, but her gaze was sharp. 6 months later, at Grandma June's 80th birthday, it happened again. A family friend asked about my work, and before I could respond, Camille waved a hand. "Harper's deep in spreadsheets. She lives in Excel." She smiled, but something told me she'd been checking those spreadsheets more closely than she let on. "Honestly, babe, I zone out the minute she talks about it," Camille once joked to a cousin. Meanwhile, I just got back from our corporate retreat in Bali. Our CEO gave my team a personal shout-out for the Luminelle campaign. Christmas that year felt no different. Camille and Daniel arrived at our parents' place in Lakeway in matching camel cashmere and oversized sunglasses, passing out designer candles and leather-bound journals from their honeymoon in the Maldives. After dinner, as we settled into the living room with eggnog and old movies playing in the background, Dad turned to me and asked about my recent promotion. I had just accepted a new role as a senior investment analyst at a boutique venture capital firm focused on emerging tech, a position that let me put my growing experience in valuation and strategy to real use. But before I could get out more than 2 words, Camille interjected with a honeyed smile. "Dad, that's so sweet of you to ask," she said. "But Harper's job is basically glorified data entry, right? Anyway, guess who's leading Varello's Asia-Pacific expansion initiative?" It wasn't even subtle anymore. Camille's dismissiveness had gone from veiled to outright cruel. Around this time, her social media began echoing the same superiority. She never named me, of course, but the caption said enough. "Some people calculate money, others make it." Blessed. Jatso Virel o life. The likes rolled in, especially from family. Aunts, cousins, even my mother left comments filled with heart emojis and admiration. They had no idea Camille had recently been passed over, twice, for promotion, or that Daniel's finance job had stalled, prompting them to refinance their condo and quietly scale back on their vacations. None of it showed. The public version of Camille was still flawless. Meanwhile, I had stopped volunteering updates about my career. My portfolio had quietly grown. I was now advising early-stage founders and making strategic angel investments. People in the VC world were beginning to recognize my name, but no one in my family had a clue. When my parents asked what I was up to, I kept it vague. Still at the firm, working on some new projects. Because if I told them the truth, that I was helping shape the future of multiple companies, they'd either brush it off or Camille would twist it into something lesser. I lived in 2 worlds. Harper, the financial strategist, known in growing circles as someone who could spot scalable potential before anyone else, and Harper, the little sister, still seen as the introvert who hadn't quite figured life out. The weight of that split grew heavier with every family gathering. I often wondered if the moment had come to pull back the curtain or let Camille keep believing the version of the story she'd always told. Our parents had started noticing the strain between Camille and me, but they chalked it up to ordinary sibling rivalry. "Don't take it personally, sweetheart," my mom told me over coffee one day. "Camille's just always been competitive." What they didn't realize was that this wasn't some casual back and forth for Camille. This was erasure, an outright dismissal of my capabilities and value. Sure, part of me still longed for their approval, but a larger part had grown tired of chasing validation from people who had decided who I was decades ago. That internal tug of war kept me up some nights. Should I continue thriving quietly in the shadows, or finally challenge the narrative Camille had worked so hard to cement? I didn't know it then, but I wouldn't have to make that choice. The circumstances would choose for me. The pivotal moment in my career came faster than I expected, but not without years of discipline. I had been slowly and strategically diversifying my investments across tech startups, firms navigating digital transformation, and underappreciated sectors in emerging markets. I'd studied trends the way some people study fashion, relentlessly, instinctively. By the time I turned 32, I'd crossed the seven-figure mark in net worth. No big announcements. I still lived in the same modest duplex and drove my faithful, slightly dented Toyota. While Camille and Daniel hosted dinner parties at their luxury condo, I reinvested profits and fortified my position. Word began to spread quietly in the investment world. One day, I got an unexpected message from Margaret Winters, a legendary venture capitalist known for spotting serious talent early. She'd read an analysis I'd published in a fintech journal and invited me to coffee at an exclusive club in downtown Austin. Most investors your age are chasing unicorns without understanding fundamentals, she said, folding her hands. But you see the bones beneath the numbers. Margaret soon became both a mentor and an ally, introducing me to her angel investment network. You have rare talent, Harper, she said one afternoon, but you wear it like it's a burden. Why? Her question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked that. So I told her about Camille, about what it meant to grow up in someone's shadow so thoroughly you stopped stepping into light. She listened, then offered something I'll never forget. The tallest trees grow for decades before anyone notices. But when they're seen, they define the skyline. Her words echoed in my head when I received the pitch deck from Centauri Holdings, a multinational conglomerate looking for strategic private capital to back an aggressive expansion into digital media and tech. I knew instantly this was the moment everything would change. Centauri Holdings' portfolio spanned industries, media, tech, consumer goods, and, in a twist of fate, included Virello Brands, the very company where Camille had built her image, career, and reputation. I spent weeks immersed in their financials, business model, and long-term growth forecasts. I analyzed competitive trends, ran simulations on shifting market variables, and studied internal restructuring patterns. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a smart financial move. It was a strategic gold mine. And maybe something more. After a final round of discussions with Margaret and two other advisors, I made the biggest call of my career. I liquidated several high-performing positions in my portfolio and committed $20 million to Centauri in exchange for a substantial minority stake. The deal granted me oversight of several subsidiaries, including Virello, and a seat on Centauri's executive advisory board. The signing took place in a sleek glass tower in downtown Austin. I wore the only designer suit I owned, bought on clearance 2 years ago, and sat across from executives in bespoke tailoring. The documents I signed didn't just represent equity. They marked my transition from individual investor to institutional stakeholder. "We're honored to have your insight, Ms. Lin," said Robert Keller, Centauri's CEO. "Your ability to spot undervalued growth potential is rare and highly respected." As I accepted handshakes, exchanged business cards, and nodded through praise I never expected to hear, a quiet thought slid in. If only my family could see me now. And immediately, another voice answered, "But why does that still matter to you?" On the drive home, I debated saying something, telling my parents, even telling Camille. I imagined their stunned faces, especially hers, hearing that I now held influence over a company she'd spent a decade climbing through. But I also remembered the years of snide comments, the dismissals, the patronizing smiles. Would they believe me? Or would Camille wave it off as chance or circumstance? So I said nothing. At least, not yet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Camille had spent years diminishing my work, and now I had a seat at the table where decisions about her company's direction were being made. Virello was just one of many pieces in Centauri's puzzle. But for me, It was the most symbolic. I had no intention of interfering in her role. I respected the line between personal and professional too deeply for that. But knowing I held influence in a space she believed I'd never enter brought a quiet, complicated feeling I couldn't quite name. Vindication? Maybe. Or perhaps it was just the strange symmetry of life finally playing out, one strategic move at a time. Among the steady stream of emails I fielded each day were several related to Virello brand's internal restructuring, particularly its brand strategy division, which of course included Camille's team. As I reviewed the proposed changes from my home office, barefoot, hair pulled into a low ponytail, coffee cooling beside me, I couldn't help but picture Camille in her designer blazer, seated in her corner office, completely unaware that her younger sister, the one she'd patronized for decades, was now weighing in on the future of her department. Call it irony. Call it justice. Either way, the universe had a flair for poetic timing. 3 weeks after my Centauri investment, an invitation popped up in our family group chat. Special brunch for Dad's 65th this Sunday. 11 a.m. at Le Poivre. Dressy casual. No gifts, just your presence. My mom had even added a string of cheerful emojis. Camille responded instantly. Can't wait to celebrate the best dad ever. Daniel and I will bring champagne. I replied, simply, looking forward to it. In the days that followed, my role with Centauri expanded rapidly. I was pulled into back-to-back meetings, offering insight on financial impacts and marketing realignment strategies, including a major campaign pivot that would impact Camille's division directly. I found myself speaking with Virello's executive leadership, reviewing timelines and evaluating transition risks. In those Zoom meetings, I was Ms. Lin, calm, prepared, respected. But around my family, I was still just Harper, the quiet one, the afterthought. The disconnect had never felt more surreal. Sunday morning arrived cloudless and warm. I responded to a few last-minute Centauri emails before heading to brunch. When I opened my closet, I paused. Normally, I defaulted to something plain for family events, avoiding Camille's inevitable comments about my conservative style. But today felt different. I chose a navy wrap dress I usually wore for investor presentations. Sleek, but understated. Pearl studs, low nude heels, just enough polish to feel grounded without making a statement. I was brushing on a light layer of foundation when my phone buzzed. Camille. I paused, then picked up. Morning, superstar, she chirped, voice airy with barely concealed smugness. Just checking. Are you still coming today? Of course, I said. Wouldn't miss it. Awesome! I've got big news to share, she said, the excitement in her voice like a champagne bottle ready to pop. I just got promoted. Executive Director of Strategic Partnerships at Virello. They're restructuring everything around my vision. My heart caught. Because the very restructuring she was celebrating was what I had been quietly engineering all week. The executive changes at Virello hadn't been finalized. In fact, I still had documents flagged in my inbox, drafts outlining 2 possible organizational structures for the brand strategy division. Nothing had been approved. Either Camille was overselling a potential promotion, or someone at Virello had spoken out of turn. That's interesting, I replied, keeping my tone light. I thought those decisions were still under review. There was a pause on the line, just a beat too long. Then Camille's voice returned, edged and cool. What would you know about it? I didn't respond. She added, almost as an afterthought. Anyway, just be there at 11. And try wearing something halfway decent, okay? This is for Dad. I'm bringing a friend to take photos. Want everything to look perfect. Click. I stared at my phone, emotions churning. Part of me wanted to scan my inbox, double-check whether someone from Virello had bypassed the board. But I caught myself. That would be crossing a line I had worked too hard to honor. No matter how personal this felt, my role at Centauri demanded discretion. So I tucked the phone away, finished my makeup, grabbed my keys, and drove toward Le Poivre, the upscale French bistro downtown where brunch was being held. Camille's claim gnawed at me. Had she fabricated it for attention? Or had someone leaked premature news internally, giving her a reason to boast before the facts aligned? Either way, the day had just become more layered than I'd prepared for. I rehearsed calm replies to potential digs, reminding myself, this isn't about Camille. It's about Dad. Keep your center. Don't let her shake it. I arrived early, handed my keys to the valet, and stepped into the soft elegance of the restaurant. Marble floors, gold fixtures, the faint scent of lavender and coffee in the air. My parents were already seated on the terrace, where the breeze carried hints of spring blooms. Dad stood immediately, face lighting up. "There's my Harper," he said, pulling me into a hug. "Right on time." Mom kissed my cheek, eyeing my outfit with raised eyebrows. "That dress is very sharp on you," she said with a hint of surprise, as though I'd borrowed confidence from someone else's closet. "She just texted," Mom added, glancing at her phone. "Camille's running late. Something about a work fire to put out first." Of course she was. Her work emergencies always happened right before family events, ensuring a dramatic entrance and reinforcing her supposed indispensability. We ordered drinks, catching up on Dad's retirement, their anniversary cruise, easy topics. But 20 minutes later, the hush shifted. Camille and Daniel arrived, flashing smiles, dripping style. Camille's dress shimmered, likely worth more than my quarterly grocery budget. Camille swept into the terrace like she was stepping onto a runway, hair glossy, styled in effortless waves, makeup precisely applied. Daniel trailed behind her, tall and polished in a tailored navy suit, carrying a bottle of champagne with the practiced ease of someone who had played this role before. "Apologies, we're late," Camille announced, her voice a few decibels louder than necessary. The CEO needed my input on the Asia-Pacific expansion strategy before tomorrow's board meeting. She air-kissed Mom's cheeks, hugged Dad with the careful restraint of someone protecting a dry-clean-only outfit, and gave me a glance paired with a faint nod. "Harper, you made it. And in a new dress? How nice." There it was. Approval, tinged with condescension. Like she was surprised I owned something with a tailored fit. They took their seats, and Camille instantly became the gravitational center of the table, turning slightly toward our parents, shoulders angled just enough to edge me out. Daniel ordered the champagne with flair, raising a toast not just to Dad's birthday, but to Camille's incredible news. I sipped water, watching the performance. The table was being set in more ways than one. Just as Camille launched into a familiar script about her confirmed promotion, the waiter brought menus, briefly derailing the conversation. "Before we order," Dad said, smiling warmly, "I just want to thank you all for being here. Having my girls in one place, best gift I could ask for." He looked so happy. For a second, guilt flickered in my chest. I didn't want to disrupt his moment. Sensing a lull, Mom turned toward me. "So, Harper, how's work? Still enjoying it?" I inhaled to answer, but Camille jumped in. "Mom, let's not put Harper on the spot," she said sweetly. "You know she doesn't love talking about work, and that's okay. We all hit professional plateaus sometimes." Her smile was tight and fake, her pity louder than her praise. I steadied my breath. "Actually, things are going really well. I've been leading—" "Oh, Daniel," she interrupted, whipping her head toward him. "Tell them about your firm's latest client." He launched into a scripted success story, while Camille chimed in about their networking prowess, turning the spotlight back where she wanted it. Our parents asked questions, nodding along, fully engaged for 10 long minutes. When the subject finally faded, Mom tried again. "Harper, you were saying?" I smiled politely. "I've been focusing on venture opportunities in the tech sector, and recently—" Camille burst out laughing. "Oh my God, are you still at that tiny firm? What's it been, 5, 6 years?" Her voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. "Same job title too?" She turned to our parents with mock concern. "Isn't it adorable how loyal she is?" "Harper's still with that little analytics firm, right?" Camille said lightly, swirling her mimosa. "Crunching numbers in some back-office cubicle. It's sweet, really. Some people just prefer stability over ambition." Her voice oozed condescension, enough to make my cheeks flush. Daniel gave a low chuckle, perfectly on cue, while my parents exchanged a glance. Half apology, half discomfort. Dad cleared his throat. Everyone moves at their own pace, Camille. He meant it as a peace offering, but it only gave her more runway. Of course, Dad. Totally agree. Not everyone's wired for the pressure of executive roles. Some people do better behind the scenes. Right, Harper? She tilted her head toward me, smiling with mock warmth. There's no shame in that, she added. Worker bees are important too. Something snapped into place inside me. Years of comments like this, so polished, so public, had chipped away at my patience. But today, they fused into something sharper than anger. Clarity. And then my phone buzzed. A notification lit up the screen. From Robert Keller. Subject, urgent. Virello. Restructure approval required. Centauri's CEO timing, it seemed, had a sense of drama. I took a slow sip of water, steadying my breath. You know, Camille, I said quietly but clearly, I think you might be a little behind on where I'm at. She arched one perfectly filled-in brow, lips quirking. Oh? Enlighten me. About where I work, what I do, who I am professionally. I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I was done rushing to defend myself. Let the moment breathe. She scoffed gently. You've been buried in that background finance job forever. And that's fine. It's respectable. Some people just aren't meant for the spotlight. She raised her hand to signal the waiter for more champagne, dismissing me entirely. I slid my phone forward on the table, screen still lit with the subject line that carried more weight than she could yet comprehend. I'm not with that firm anymore, I said, tone even. I've been independently investing for years. Last month, I became a major stakeholder in Centauri Holdings. Daniel's brow lifted slightly. As an investment banker, he recognized the name instantly. Camille blinked. Centauri what? Is that, like, a boutique consulting firm? A small, cold part of me savored the moment. Centauri Holdings is a global corporation, I replied, voice calm. Their portfolio includes Virello brands. Her expression faltered. I watched the gears turn as she tried to place the name, then realized. She worked for me. One of their holdings is Virello brands, I said, my tone even. That includes your employer, Camille. Color drained from her face. That's not possible, she said flatly. Virello is fully owned by Centauri Holdings, I continued, keeping my voice calm. And 3 weeks ago, I became one of their major private investors, with oversight responsibilities over multiple subsidiaries, including yours. Daniel turned to me, eyes narrowed, clearly doing the math. My parents sat frozen, struggling to bridge the gap between the daughter they thought they knew and the one sitting in front of them. Camille's face was a storm of disbelief, cycling from shock to panic. You're making this up, she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual bite. You don't have that kind of money or power. Without speaking, I picked up my phone and angled the screen toward her. The email from Centauri's CEO was still open. She leaned in, scanning it quickly. Her eyes stopped at the salutation. Dear Ms. Lin, as our valued major investor, your sign-off is required on the proposed executive restructuring at Virello Brands. Camille paled. That restructuring? She whispered. My promotion? It hasn't been finalized? No, I said softly. The executive team made a recommendation, but any structural changes require investor approval. That email is asking for mine. The silence that followed was sharp and disorienting. For once, Camille had no rehearsed line, no elegant redirection. She simply stared, completely undone. Dad was the first to speak. Harper, are you saying you're part owner of Camille's company? There was a tangle of emotion in his voice, pride, confusion, maybe regret. I'm a significant minority investor, I clarified gently. I don't handle operations, but I do have authority over high-level decisions. I turned to Camille. I kept my career private because, frankly, it never seemed welcome in our family. Every time I tried to share something meaningful, it got waved away or overshadowed. It became easier to let you assume whatever you wanted. Camille's stunned silence was starting to harden. Her eyes narrowed with defensive fury. Mom reached for my hand. But honey, why didn't you ever say anything? Because, I said, voice steady, Every attempt was met with a laugh or a correction. Eventually, I stopped trying. A waiter approached with more champagne, sensed the tension in the air, and wisely turned back. Camille's voice finally returned, brittle and strained. "This is ridiculous. Even if you got lucky with an investment, that doesn't mean you understand corporate strategy. You've always been the quiet one, the observer, the background." I gave her a small, unflinching smile. "Yes," I said, "the one who watches, who listens, who sees everything. The one who sees patterns, in numbers and in people. The one who built something real while you focused on building an image." I didn't say it to hurt her, just the truth. But Camille recoiled like I'd slapped her. She turned to our parents, clearly expecting backup, the familiar reinforcement that had always cushioned her. But they weren't looking at her. They were looking at me, and not with pity, with recognition. In that moment, everything shifted. The quiet tension that had hovered between us for years snapped into something solid, something irreversible. I had wanted this validation for so long, dreamed of it, imagined the moment where everyone would finally see me. But now that it was here, it felt different. Not triumphant, not even satisfying. Just a strange mix of release, sorrow for all the years spent trying, and, unexpectedly, compassion for Camille. The brunch had been about Dad's 65th birthday, a simple celebration. But now, it was a turning point, one that would change how our family saw both of us forever. "This doesn't make sense," Camille said sharply, the panic starting to bleed into her tone. "How could you have enough money to invest in Centauri? You've always lived so modestly." She wasn't just confused, she was reprocessing everything. Every family dinner, every brunch like this one, every moment she'd written me off. "I've been investing for over a decade," I said calmly. "I lived below my means, made strategic moves, built a network in the investment community. Success doesn't always look like curated Instagram posts and brand name heels." Daniel was watching me now with an entirely different expression. Interest. Respect. Maybe. "Centauri's last private investment round was extremely competitive," he said. "We had clients trying to get in. They rejected almost everyone. You must have made quite an impression." I nodded, not with pride, just honesty. "My track record's in tech and digital transformation. Margaret Winters recommended me." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "The Margaret Winters?" Camille glanced between us, irritated by the way the conversation was turning. "Who even is that?" she snapped. "And why are we acting like this is real? Harper's always been the background person, the quiet one." Dad finally spoke. His voice was soft, but firm. "Maybe that's the problem, Camille. We've been so focused on what Harper wasn't, we never saw what she was." His words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Mom reached for my hand, her grip gentle, uncertain. Her expression was softer than I'd seen in years. "I think we owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Not just today, but for a long time. If you've ever been underestimated, only to rise in ways no one saw coming, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next in my story might just surprise you too." "Harper, I had no idea you were doing so well," Mom said softly. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, just genuinely confused. But before I could answer, Camille jumped in. "Because she's making this sound bigger than it is," she said, her voice brittle. "It's probably some small stake she's blowing out of proportion to finally feel impressive." The desperation was obvious now. It wasn't just disbelief, it was fear. Her narrative was unraveling. I sighed and did something I rarely did at family events. I took control. "I understand this is surprising, Camille. It doesn't fit the version of me you've held on to, but this is the truth." I unlocked my phone, opened my email, and laid it flat on the table, scrolling through message after message from Centauri's executive leadership. Investment confirmations, meeting summaries, minutes from board strategy sessions where my name was listed among key contributors. "These are real," I said evenly. "My role is real. And yes, I do have oversight responsibilities when it comes to Virello's major decisions, including the restructuring you mentioned." Camille stared at the screen, her face flickering through disbelief, irritation, and then something closer to resignation. "You could have told me you were investing in my company," she snapped. "You let me walk into this blind." "I didn't invest in Centauri because of you," I replied, my tone steady. "I invested because the opportunity was sound. Virello is just one of several companies in the portfolio. Honestly, I didn't even realize you worked there until after the paperwork was signed." Mostly true, I had seen the connection, but it had no bearing on my decision. Dad leaned forward, pragmatic as ever. "So, this restructuring Camille mentioned, you'll be the one to approve it?" "The executive board makes recommendations," I explained. "Investors review them for strategy and financial viability. I don't sign off on individuals unless there's something unusual flagged." Then I looked at Camille, clearly, calmly. "Your future at Virello will depend on your performance, not on our relationship. I'm not here to interfere, but I'm not going to prop up a narrative either." Camille sat back, quiet, her expression unreadable. "I still don't understand why you kept this hidden," Mom said gently. "We would have been so proud." The words hit harder than expected. Would they have been proud? Or would Camille have just twisted my success into something smaller, something less shiny than her own? "I tried to share," I said quietly. "But every time, the conversation was redirected. But every time I tried to talk about my work over the years, I was interrupted, brushed aside, or met with comparisons that made my choices feel small. Eventually, I stopped trying." Across the table, my parents exchanged a glance. Quiet, uncomfortable, but telling. They'd seen it happen. Maybe not always consciously, but they hadn't stopped it. Daniel, ever the tactician, was now watching me with renewed interest. "Centauri's portfolio is no joke," he said. "Are you involved with any of their AI ventures? I have clients who'd love to make introductions." His sudden attempt to network, when just an hour ago he barely acknowledged me, might have been amusing if it weren't so transparent. "I don't discuss investment details outside formal channels," I said, cool but polite. "Professional boundaries are important to me." That, oddly, seemed to impress him more than anything else I'd shared. Camille, meanwhile, had gone quiet, a rarity. Her thoughts were spinning fast behind carefully controlled features. Finally, she broke the silence with a strained smile. "Well," she said, forcing a light tone, "this is definitely a birthday surprise, huh, Dad? Turns out my little sister's been a secret tycoon this whole time." Her laugh was hollow, the tension thick under the surface. Dad reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner, Harper," he said, voice low but sincere. "But I'm proud of you. So proud." I swallowed the knot forming in my throat. It meant more than I wanted to admit. "Thanks, Dad," I said quietly. "That means a lot." Then I turned to Camille. This was a moment that could widen the divide, or begin to mend it. "Success doesn't always look the same," I said. "You've done great things in marketing. My path just looked different. That's all." She gave a slow, stiff nod. Her pride was still wounded, but the ice was beginning to crack. The waiter returned, polite as ever. "Are we ready to order?" We picked up our menus, but everything had changed. My mother asked thoughtful questions about my investments. My father beamed. Daniel tried again to talk shop. And Camille? Camille sat quietly, watching the shift she never saw coming. As our orders were placed and the conversation moved forward, something lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt light, seen. The secret was out, and I wasn't hiding anymore. Whatever came next, with Camille, with Virello, with our family, would, at the very least, be built on truth instead of assumption. As we raised our glasses for Dad's birthday toast, his eyes met mine with something I hadn't seen before. Understanding. Respect. "To both my daughters," he said, his voice steady, "each exceptional in her own way." The words caught me off guard, almost bringing tears to my eyes. That was all I had ever wanted. Not to eclipse Camille, not to compete, just to be seen. For me. Not the quieter daughter, not the one in the background. Just seen. The rest of brunch flowed differently. The conversation shifted, rebalancing itself as my family recalibrated their view of who I was and what I'd achieved. Camille didn't say much, but her eyes stayed on me, not with her usual judgment, but with something closer to curiosity. The days that followed felt like watching an alternate version of my life unfold. Monday morning, I woke to a text from Camille. "We need to talk. Coffee after work?" I agreed, unsure what to expect. But before I could dwell on it, my inbox began filling with its usual rhythm of updates, project overviews, meeting requests, financial summaries. One message, though, stood out. A company-wide announcement from Centauri. The restructuring at Virello had been finalized by the investor committee over the weekend. Camille's department was indeed affected, but contrary to what she had proclaimed during brunch, she hadn't been promoted. The new executive director position had gone to Miranda Wong. Camille had been named a senior team lead, reporting to Miranda. I wondered if she'd seen it yet. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 3 missed calls from Camille, followed by a stream of texts. "Did you do this? Call me. You had to be behind this." I inhaled slowly before responding. "In meetings until noon." The decision was made by the full investor committee based on internal recommendations. Happy to discuss professional boundaries over coffee. It was brief, perhaps cold, but it was necessary. By 5:30 p.m., I arrived at a quiet coffee shop we'd both agreed on. Neutral territory, halfway between our offices. Camille was already there, perfectly put together, but the tight set of her jaw betrayed her calm. I sat down and spoke first. "I didn't do this to spite you," I said. "The restructuring was already in progress before I became an investor." She said nothing at first, but I could tell. This conversation would change everything. Again. "The committee voted based on performance metrics and strategic alignment," I said calmly, meeting Camille's glare. Her eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe that? After years of me being the more successful one, you just happen to gain power over my company, and I'm the one passed over for a promotion? That's not a coincidence, Harper." Her tone still carried the same biting dismissal from our childhood, but I refused to let it shake me. "Camille, I've reviewed your department's reports. You're talented, but Miranda has consistently outperformed you in client retention, budget efficiency, and team leadership. This isn't personal. It's business." She stared hard, as if trying to uncover a smirk or smug satisfaction. But I kept my expression neutral, professional. After a long pause, she asked, "How long?" "Since what? How long have you been this successful? While acting like you were barely scraping by?" That question struck me, not for what it implied, but for what it revealed. She hadn't just dismissed me. She'd never really seen me. "I never acted like anything," I said evenly. "I tried to talk about my work. You talked over me, made jokes, changed the subject. Eventually, I stopped offering." Camille looked away, maybe replaying a few of those moments in her mind. "I just thought, I don't know, you were some finance person doing spreadsheets." "That's because you never listened. You decided early on your career path was shinier, and you filtered everything I said through that lens." The next morning, my inbox chimed with a new message from Robert Keller, Centauri's CEO. "Lin, your sister Camille reached out directly regarding her department's restructure, citing your family connection and requesting a personal meeting. While I understand family ties, we typically ask all staff to go through formal HR channels. How would you like to proceed?" Classic Camille, crossing boundaries to rewrite the narrative. I thanked Robert and advised that Camille should follow standard HR protocol, like any other employee. Later that week, I visited Centauri's downtown headquarters for scheduled investor meetings. Passing through the Virello floor, I paused near the entry where a new investor plaque had been installed. There it was, Harper Lin, etched into the brushed metal alongside the other major stakeholders. "Harper!" a voice called out. I turned to see Miranda Wong, now Camille's direct supervisor, walking toward me with a warm smile. "I thought that was you. It's so good to meet in person. Your feedback during the digital strategy call last month was incredibly sharp." We chatted briefly about Virello's upcoming market initiatives. As we spoke, I noticed Camille across the lobby, watching us. Expression unreadable. Miranda smiled. Let's do lunch sometime. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts. I'd love to pick your brain sometime, especially on emerging tech integration in marketing analytics, Miranda said, smiling. I nodded politely, aware that Camille was still watching from across the lobby. After Miranda walked away, Camille made her way over. Her steps were precise, her posture composed. But there was tension beneath every movement. So, this is the real you, she said, gesturing toward my tailored blazer, the investor badge clipped discreetly to my lapel, the high-rise office backdrop. This has always been me, I said gently, just not the version you imagined. Her phone buzzed. I glanced down and caught James's name flash briefly across the screen. Since the brunch, he'd sent me several messages. Questions about investment strategy, introductions to potential clients, all laced with a new tone of respect. Or maybe opportunism. James wants to know if you'll meet with a few of his clients, Camille said flatly. He's been talking about you and Centauri nonstop. I gave a small shake of my head. I don't mix family with investment decisions. If his clients are interested, they're welcome to go through the proper channels. She studied me for a moment. You're really serious about those lines, aren't you? I have to be, I said. Reputation and integrity are everything in my field. 2 weeks later, I was invited to dinner at my parents' home. Just me. No Camille. Over plates of my mother's homemade lasagna, they asked questions. Real ones. Thoughtful ones. They listened. They didn't interrupt. We always knew you were smart, Dad said slowly. But we didn't realize you were building something so impactful. There was pride in his voice. But something else too. Remorse. We should have paid more attention, Mom added, reaching for my hand. We got used to Camille needing the spotlight. And you? You always seemed fine in the background. It wasn't fair to you. I blinked back tears. It's okay, I whispered. I found my way. Dad nodded. You certainly did. 3 days later, Camille texted. She asked to meet at a quiet park near her apartment. I agreed. When I arrived, she was already sitting on a bench, her expression more vulnerable than I'd seen in years. I've been thinking, she said as I sat down. About us. About how I've treated you. She looked me directly in the eye. I've been horrible to you, haven't I? I hesitated, surprised by her honesty. We've had a complicated relationship, I said carefully. Camille shook her head. I've been dismissive, condescending. I've interrupted you, talked over you, downplayed everything you've done, Camille said, her voice quieter now. And the whole time, she gestured vaguely, as if grasping for words. You were building something real, while I was just talking about building something real. Her honesty caught me off guard. Why? I asked gently. Why did you need to diminish me? Camille sat back, watching the breeze move through the trees before answering. I think I've always been terrified I wasn't enough, that if I didn't stand out, loudly, I'd disappear. You always seemed okay in the background, calm, self-assured, and I wasn't. She looked down, a flicker of shame in her expression. Maybe I resented that. You seemed at peace, while I was exhausting myself chasing everyone's approval. It was more self-awareness than I'd expected. Not because she wasn't capable of it, but because I had never seen her let her guard down like this. For what it's worth, I said softly, I always admired your confidence, your ease in rooms full of people. That didn't come naturally to me. She let out a dry laugh. Look at us, both envying the other, and never admitting it. We sat in silence, not awkward but quiet, a stillness that felt like the beginning of something new. So, Camille said finally, half smiling, my little sister is basically my boss's boss's boss. That's going to take some time to wrap my head around. I smiled back. I'm not your boss. I'm an investor in the parent company. It's a very different lane. She tilted her head. Still, you hold influence over Glowpath's future. I do, I admitted, but not over individual personnel decisions. That's up to management. Your career is, and always has been, yours to define. She nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long time, her expression held no trace of competition or condescension. That's actually reassuring, she said. I wouldn't want special treatment, not even the good kind. You want to prove something to yourself now, I said. She nodded. Yeah, I think I do. Something in Camille had shifted. Something deep. Maybe it was realizing how little she had understood about me, or maybe about herself. As we said goodbye and walked in opposite directions, I knew we were stepping into unfamiliar territory. The old dynamic was gone. What would take its place? I wasn't sure. But for the first time in years, I felt hope, real hope for something better. That night, an email from Camille arrived in my inbox. The email from Camille had been brief, but surprising. I've been thinking about something Miranda mentioned today. Your presentation on digital integration. Any chance you could share those materials? I think I have a lot to learn. A small gesture. But coming from Camille, it felt monumental. She wasn't just acknowledging my expertise, she was asking to learn from it. I sent the deck that night, along with a few annotated resources I thought might help. My message was short, happy to discuss anytime. 2 simple words, happy, anytime. They felt like cornerstones of something new, something we were building carefully, brick by brick. 6 months later, we gathered at my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner. The table was the same. The china, the scent of roasted turkey, the cornbread stuffing, unchanged. But everything else felt transformed. I arrived early to help my mom in the kitchen, like I always had. But this time, the conversation felt different. As we chopped vegetables and stirred gravy, she asked thoughtful questions about a new startup I'd invested in, an education technology platform founded by women of color. She listened as I explained scalability metrics, long-term valuation, and the potential for social impact. I never knew how passionate you are about this, she said, pausing as she crimped the edge of a pumpkin pie. All these years, I thought you were just being private. But really, you were trying to tell us, weren't you? I nodded, and to my surprise, there was no bitterness, no sting. I tried for a long time, I said, but eventually it was just easier to keep that part of my life separate. She was quiet for a moment, then placed her flour-dusted hand on mine. Your dad and we've talked about this a lot lately, how we let ourselves fall into a rhythm of praising Camille's more visible wins, and how we didn't always see what was right in front of us. She looked me in the eye. I'm sorry, Harper. Truly. The words settled into my chest with surprising warmth. It's okay, Mom. I found my way. Yes, she said softly, pride shining in her smile. You certainly did. Just then, Dad wandered in, stealing a bite of stuffing and planting a kiss on my cheek. There's my investment genius, he teased. Oh, and by the way, the Caltech Business Program Director called yesterday. Wants you to speak to their grad students about ethical investing next semester. My eyebrows lifted. They called you? He grinned sheepishly. They couldn't reach you. Hope you don't mind. I gave them your email. The idea of my father proudly telling strangers about my work, even facilitating professional connections, was so far removed from our past that I felt momentarily disoriented. That's fine, Dad, I said, steadying my voice. I'd be happy to speak with them. The doorbell rang, and I instinctively braced myself. Camille and Nate had arrived. Old habits die hard. But the Camille who stepped through the door wasn't quite the same sister I'd grown up with. She still looked like she'd walked out of a lifestyle magazine. Perfect hair, polished boots, her signature soft beige trench. But something about her was softer, less curated. She hugged Mom and Dad warmly before turning to me with a smile that actually reached her eyes. Hey, investment whisperer, she said, holding up a bottle. I brought that cab you said you liked. What was it? Goldcrest Reserve? It was. I'd mentioned it offhand weeks ago. A small thing, but one she'd never have paid attention to before. Dinner flowed differently than years past. Camille still had stories. She'd always loved a good spotlight. But now, she offered more than highlight reels. She spoke about her new role at Glow Wave with a mix of pride and humility. It hasn't been easy under Miranda, she admitted over sweet potatoes. But I've learned more in the past few months than in the last 2 years combined. And, Harper, that integration framework you sent? Total game changer. My team's already seeing results. I blinked. The public acknowledgement, calm and authentic, was something I never expected. I'm glad it helped, I said. There's a webinar next month with the same strategist, actually. She's brilliant on multi-channel mapping. Camille nodded, already typing a note in her phone. We should watch it together. Compare takeaways afterward? 6 months ago, that suggestion would have been laughable. Now it felt natural. Later, while we cleared dishes, Nate cornered me in the kitchen. So, Harper, he began, dropping his voice, is there anything you could do to help Camille move up faster at Glowwave? Old Nate, always seeing opportunity in proximity. I smiled politely. Nate, my role at Centurion is separate. Camille's doing just fine on her own, and that's how it should be. Before he could press, Camille appeared. Nate, stop, she said plainly. Harper's made her boundaries clear, and I agree with them. I want to earn my own career milestones. The surprise on his face was almost funny. Babe, it's just a small favor. No, she cut in. Firm now? I've got this. That's not how either of us wants this to work. Right, Harper? Camille said, her tone steady. The solidarity between us in that moment felt both unfamiliar and deeply grounding. Right, I confirmed, meeting my sister's eyes with a new, unspoken understanding. Later, as we gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, Dad raised his mug in an impromptu toast. To my remarkable daughters, he said, his voice thick with emotion, who are teaching this old man about growth and reconciliation. Mom squeezed his hand, adding gently, and to new beginnings. Over the following weeks, Camille and I began building something we'd never had before. Not best friend closeness, but a quiet, mutual authenticity. We met for the occasional lunch in South Congress cafes or local spots along Lady Bird Lake, where our conversations drifted from work challenges to family memories, this time with humor and perspective. One afternoon in early December, Camille stirred her tea and looked thoughtful. You know what I've realized? She asked. All those years I spent putting on this perfect image, and you were the one actually building something real. I glanced up, surprised by her candor. She continued, I was so focused on being impressive, but I missed what actually matters. I nodded. We all get caught in our own metrics. But your work has real value. You're brilliant at what you do. You just got sidetracked by how it looked. She smiled faintly. Well, I've started volunteering at a local literacy nonprofit, helping them rethink how they reach kids and parents. It's not flashy, but it feels right. That new layer of Camille, a softer, more grounded version, felt like watching spring bloom in someone who'd always clung to winter. As the new year began, I launched a mentorship program for young women in underserved communities interested in finance. I didn't expect Camille to jump in, but she did, offering to help with branding, outreach, and messaging. We make a good team, she said one evening as we reviewed applications together in my apartment. You with the analytics, me with the words. It was true. I found myself admiring her strengths now that the competition had faded. We might have figured this out a long time ago, I said with a wry smile. She looked up. I couldn't have back then. I needed this, all of it, to see myself clearly. That spring, during a family barbecue at our parents' house in East Austin, Camille and I prepped a salad side by side. Mom watched us with a quiet smile. I never thought I'd see this day, she whispered. You two working together without tension. It's beautiful, Mom said softly, pausing by the kitchen island with a dish towel in hand. Camille caught my eye, a spark of amusement flickering in her expression. Don't worry, Mom. I'm sure we'll butt heads again eventually. But at least now, we'll do it as equals. That word, equals, lingered in the air like a long-awaited breeze on a sweltering Austin day. It captured the core of how much had changed between us. She was no longer the star while I stood in her shadow. We had carved out space for one another as whole, capable women, different, yes, but finally seen in full light. One evening in late April, Camille called while I was sorting receipts for my quarterly reports. I've been offered a new role at Brighter Path, she said, unable to hide the energy in her voice. They want me to lead a pilot initiative on sustainable marketing. It's a huge leap, and Miranda personally recommended me. Her voice quivered with something deeper than pride, earned confidence. That's incredible, Camille. You've put in the work. You deserve this. Thanks, Harp, she said quietly. Coming from you, it really means something. After we hung up, I sat alone in my office, the hum of the ceiling fan soft in the background. I thought back to that explosive brunch 6 months ago, when everything fractured before it began to heal. Somehow, we'd built this new version of our relationship on hundreds of tiny moments, check-in texts, shared coffees, co-hosted webinars, and more than a few hard conversations. But the biggest change wasn't in our titles, roles, or paychecks. It was in how we saw ourselves and each other. I no longer craved Camille's validation to feel whole, and she no longer needed to prove she was ahead. In early June, we began co-developing a nonprofit program aimed at financial literacy for young women, especially those from underserved Texas communities. I brought the financial framework. She brought the branding brilliance. Together, we created something bigger than either of us had imagined. During one planning session, she paused mid-sentence and looked up. "You know what I've realized?" she said. "Being overlooked for so long might have been your greatest edge. You built power and peace, without all the noise." I smiled. "And maybe being placed on a pedestal was your greatest obstacle. You were always trying to live up instead of out." Camille leaned back, nodding. "I think we're finally living our way now." Exactly. It had taken Camille this long to realize that validation from others was a hollow stand-in for self-understanding. Hearing such wisdom from the sister who once mocked my quiet, strategic path was perhaps the clearest sign of just how far we'd both come. On a warm July evening in Austin, we launched our nonprofit foundation with an intimate rooftop reception. Family, close colleagues, a few community leaders. The city shimmered behind us as Camille and I stood side by side, presenting our shared vision for empowering young women through financial and communication literacy. As I paused between slides, I noticed Mom and Dad exchanging glances, confused perhaps by how their once opposite daughters had become such a cohesive team, but proud nonetheless. Later, as guests sipped drinks and wandered toward the edge of the terrace for selfies and skyline views, Camille tapped her glass for attention. "I want to say something," she announced. "A year ago, I believed success meant the right promotion, the right applause, the right apartment. I compared myself constantly, to my peers, to my social feed, even to my sister." She looked at me, not with competition, but warmth. "What Harper has taught me, by example, not lectures, is that real success isn't about being seen. It's about seeing yourself clearly and building something valuable even when no one's clapping." A quiet hush settled over the crowd, the truth of her words rippling across the room. As the night wound down and our guests filtered out, Camille and I stayed on the balcony, letting the breeze carry the laughter and warmth of the evening back into silence. "Did you ever think we'd be here?" she asked, gesturing toward the skyline. "Actually liking each other, let alone working together?" I laughed. "Not in a million years. But I'm glad we are." She turned to face me fully. "Me too. And Harper, thank you for not using your influence to tear me down when you could have. That meant more than you know." The acknowledgement wasn't necessary, but it mattered. It recognized the journey, the shift in power, the test of restraint, and the choice to heal instead of win. In the end, the transformation hadn't been about revenge or status. It had been about integrity, about becoming the version of ourselves we'd both needed all along. As we looked out over the lights of Austin, I realized something. Being the one who signed Camille's paycheck had never really been the point. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this journey with me. It wasn't an easy one. Untangling years of being overlooked, learning to speak up without shouting, and rebuilding a relationship that I once thought was beyond repair. I didn't set out to become someone powerful or influential. I simply followed what made sense to me. quiet hard work, integrity, and trusting in my own pace. And in the end, it turned out to be more than enough. If any part of my story reminds you of your own, of being underestimated, of staying silent to keep peace, of hiding your shine to make others comfortable, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? What advice would you give to someone who's just now finding their voice? Drop it in the comments. I promise I'll be reading them all. And if there's one lesson I could leave you with, it's this. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to win every argument to be powerful. Sometimes, the most lasting transformation comes not from proving others wrong, but from staying rooted in who you are until the world can't help but notice. So if you've ever been the quiet one at the table, the one whose story was never asked, know this. You still get to define your ending, and it's never too late to start. If this story resonated with you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us how strength can look different for everyone, but it always matters.